Welcome back to the First Team. I'm Joe DeLeone, joined by former NFL and college football QB Matt Sims. Also joining us is Ryan Roberts, Irish Breakdown recruiting analyst. Today, we're going to be talking about and breaking down everything regarding the news surrounding Northwestern's scandal and the firing of their head coach, Pat Fitzgerald. So the news broke on Monday that he was not going to be the current coach continuing his role as the coach at Northwestern. After over the weekend and the end of last week, there was reports of serious allegations of hazing going on within this program. Guys, I want to start off here with there's for some reason, which was odd, guys like Danny Cannell, and I'm blanking on the guy from Outkick who was also saying that they rushed a judgment that this was, a mob attack on Pat Fitzgerald to go after him and take him down as the head coach. But I am of the belief that this was the right thing to do. There seemed to have been mounting evidence, but I want to get your guys' thoughts on this situation. Was this the right approach? Did they handle this effectively? Because there seems to be a bit of a debate on if that was done appropriately. Matt, let's go to you first.
Yeah, anytime that you're in these type of situations, I feel like there is no perfect way for you to end a marriage that at the time seemed like the most perfect marriage in all of college football. It's unfortunate for the players, it's unfortunate for the Northwestern community and their athletic community. I mean, just in the past year, we saw Pat Fitzgerald get that contract extension for another 10 years for $57 million, right? The guy was going to be a coach there for, all the way into 2030. So it's unbelievable that the events have happened the way that they have. At the same time, we have to have some level of sensitivity, empathy, and sympathy for those who are potentially have been harmed during these hazing allegations. Now, of course, there will always be the, he said, they said, whatever situation, when you get into these things. But it sounds like there's enough evidence that does say that these things took place. And everyone keeps saying the same thing. Pat Fitzgerald, he didn't know about it. Well, in defense of that, that's actually a really bad sign if he didn't know anything about these things going on underneath, his control of that organization. So as much as I think a lot of us as football fans are huge fans of the gentleman and who he was and how he represented himself and the school, there is this serious underbelly that was taking place. And I think the school did the right thing. And unfortunately for them, too, there's not much time right now before the season starts. So they couldn't have this hanging over their program's head going into September for week one. I think they made the right decision. And now, where and how do they move forward is the big question.
I think they made the right decision without question. I will be completely honest about this, though, fellas. Like, when it first happened, I was a little bit back and forth on the timing of everything because I am one of those people that are like, let the process kind of figure itself out and then the truth will come out in the end, right? I know there was mounting evidence to your point, Joe. So I think that the end result would have been where we're at now, that there would have been a firing and then there would have had to been a period of figuring things out. But more I think about it, and I think you just hit on a key point, Matt, that's kind of like leading me to my opinion now, is that there's not a lot of time until the season, right? We're like 50-something days away from college football happening. And one, we're talking about who is most affected by this. It's the student athletes that are involved, right? And whether a player is going to decide to stay at Northwestern under the new regime, I know the assistant coaches are still going to be there, or if they're going to make the decision to go to a different program and then take the next avenue of their process, you need time to make those decisions, right? So if it was a longer process of figuring out Pat Fitzgerald's future, I feel like you would have had a very limited window, even more than you already have, for some of these kids to make very rash decisions, to have to figure out transfer, stay. So I think that this was the right course of action in the end, because I do think that figuring this out now, because especially if you think that this was going to be the final result, figuring this out now is more beneficial for the student athletes. Now talk to the coaches, talk to the people up top, talk to everyone involved in this process and what it's going to look like moving forward, so these players have the option of, I still want to be a part of this, or I don't want to have anything to do with this, and now I have some time to get out before, obviously, fall camp begins and everything becomes super serious. So I think that everything happened about as the right timing that it should have happened, because I think that the student athletes deserve as much possible time to make that decision for themselves.
The one thing that I point to, though, for those who are upset with the quick change of direction, because originally he was suspended for 2 weeks, I think that they set themselves up, Northwestern, the administration set themselves up for failure the way that they handled it. Had they indefinitely suspended him, that would have created a little bit more of a blanket to take their time in investigating this. They were forced to make this decision quickly after the 2-week suspension. That because the 2-week suspension is a slap on the wrist. Before the season starts, a 2-week unpaid suspension is stupid. That's a complete mishandling of the whole entire thing. The allegations were severe. Again, it's not like it was him mishandling players and running them into the ground and mistreating them or something along those lines. It was seriously disturbing. Sexual assault allegations were what was brought up, and all three of us played the game of football at varying levels. I never experienced anything weird like this. There's a couple odd things that happen in the locker room, but nothing as messed up as this. This is not normal behavior. So for accusations and evidence like this to be out there and to only suspend him for 2 weeks is just so stupid. It is a terrible, terrible handling of this by the university itself, the University of Northwestern. But at the same time, though, that my whole point here is, had they had given him an indefinite suspension, it would have allowed them to handle this a little bit easier, look into it, and then make that decision. And I agree with Matt's point, though. That's the biggest thing for me, where there is this point of, oh, he didn't know. There's not a single head coach at that level, especially in the Big Ten, that doesn't know every single thing that's going on in his locker room, especially something as crazy and messed up as this. There's no way. There's absolutely no way that he didn't know that this was going on.
And that's what's unfortunate, I think, for the entire situation is that, and the reason why they made the decision, the rash decision like you're discussing, is because they probably heard rumblings about this over the past decade or so as well, and they did nothing about that. And that's where it's a black eye, not only on Coach Fitzgerald, it's a black eye on the entire community and that whole entire program and who's running it. Of course, everyone's going to be pointing fingers and blaming each other for it. But at the end of the day, these are very, very serious allegations, like you're saying, Joe, especially too, in the time frame in which we live in now with social media and everything like that. It's way more easier for people to share their stories, to voice their opinions, to share what they saw in person. And these things have to be treated with tremendous respect and care for those who have potentially been harmed by this. And, what's really wild, too, is that this is a school that, obviously kind of turned a blind eye to what was going on, a coach that turned a blind eye to maybe what was going on or didn't know about it, but nonetheless still doesn't make it any better. But in the past few years, $250 million for a football facility, right? $800 million proposed for their new stadium renovations that are being built. So this is a school that is now just forking up hundreds of millions of dollars to improve their athletic program that was solely focused on one gentleman, and now he's gone. So now Northwestern is a really a tough position as far as just their identity crisis right now. What is going to be their identity going forward? Because essentially the whole athletic program was built upon Pat Fitzgerald and the way that he ran things within his football team.
This also now opens up the ability for multiple players, if not most of this roster, to enter the portal. Realistically, there's not going to be a mass exodus, but the best players likely are going to leave because of the messy situation that this team and the environment with this team that they're currently dealing with. Because of the fact that their coach is gone, it does reopen the portal opportunity for these players per NCAA rules. Ryan, this roster well enough to kind of share with us some of the names that you think could hop in the portal. Who are some of those guys that you think that could?
Yeah, I mean, because I think it's a really interesting conversation, Joe, because you say that it's probably not going to be a mass exodus, but I've talked to a couple of players already from Northwestern that are very undecided on their season, man. And it's not even a couple of these kids that I'm talking about. It's more like the fringe solid starter types that are on Northwestern. But when you're talking about a few of the key names that I would look for as potential transfer options, because it's not even counting the 2023 recruiting class that's obviously coming in and has just enrolled in the summer. Because like I could talk about Jordan Knox, who's a really talented offensive lineman who we actually talked about in our little bit of recruiting backgrounds and evaluations, a few months ago. But I think the main guys that I would have my eye on, and I think that other teams will have their eye on, is one is Josh Preeb, who is their starting offensive guard. He was actually slated to play left tackle this year. He was going to take over for Peter Skoronski, who, of course, went top 15 last year in the 2023 NFL Draft to the Tennessee Titans. And he was a starting left guard, was planning to move out to left tackle. He's a really good football player. I think right now, draftable player on tape as of right now, but I think he has top 150 upside. I think he could be a fourth round or better player when he eventually does enter the NFL draft, whether that is in 2024 or 2025, because the great thing about him, he's only a junior eligibility. So he's going to have 2 years of eligibility for whatever team if he does enter the portal. He has ability to play offensive guard. I think he could also play center. Like, there's no reason he can't do that. He was a kid that was going to make the transition to tackle. So college teams, NFL teams, they're always starved for good offensive linemen. And I think Josh Preeb has versatility that you look at and can get super excited about. I think the other big guy for me is Xander Mueller, who's an inside linebacker for them, who was second on the team in total tackles, but had double-digit tackles for loss last year. 6'3", 235 pounds, also a junior eligibility. So he'll have 2 years of college football. Moves well, has a nice frame. Very underrated athlete working sideline to sideline or slot to slot. I think he really has nice movement skills. He's a very intelligent football player. Everybody needs this type of player who can also play a little bit of will, but he's a true Mike on the college level into the NFL level. And then the last guy that I really am very intrigued by, but didn't play a ton in 2022, was Koko Azimi, who is a starting safety for the team, number 0. He only started 2 contests, but had over 20 tackles last year and a pass breakup. This kid is a premier alley runner from the safety position, a guy that is going to be a really good special teamer as well. If he's able to stay healthy, I think he could have been one of the best safeties in the Big Ten in 2023. And if he does enter the portal, I think that he would be a big get for a team that needs a potential starting safety and a guy that could also play special teams for you.
Matt, I know that it's really hard to know what it's like in this circumstance unless you're actually one of these players, but you are somebody who actually did transfer multiple times. And I'm just, from like your perspective, I know I'm not trying to draw too much of a parallel, but you have transferred before. And I'm just curious, like, do you think that for these players that committed to the university, didn't necessarily commit to Pat Fitzgerald, do you think it would be in their best interest to maybe separate themselves from it? Or would it be better? Is this one of those things where it might be better for them in their long-term future? It's a good academic university. It's not like this is, a lowly FCS program that doesn't have, good academics. This
like
is a good.
Oh, wow.
Shut up. Well, yeah, exactly. Like
wow.
Rhode Island.
Man, all right.
This is one of the best academic schools in the country. But from your perspective, Matt, like, what do you think? Do you think that a lot of these guys should transfer or they should stick it out?
That is really just up to the individual and what they're dealing with personally, educationally, right? And just, with their academics and athletics. It's just such a complicated situation for all these young men, and including the coaches and everyone else that is surrounding the entire program too. Yes, Joe is definitely bringing back some of the stories that I've shared with you in private about my time there when I was there with Lane Kiffin in Tennessee and when he moved on to USC, which was then replaced by Derek Dooley. For me in that particular situation, I had reached the pinnacle of just college football. I had gotten to Tennessee. I was in the SEC. I was going to compete to be a starting quarterback in the SEC at the University of Tennessee and to follow in the great footsteps of so many other great quarterbacks that had come before me. So for me, despite the fact that my head coach who recruited me left, I was staying put. I was happy where I was because I knew that I was a part of a program that was much bigger than myself and was playing against some of the greatest football players in the country. That being said, each individual is different. In this situation with Northwestern, I mean, you said it right on. It's perfect what you said, Joe. This is one of the schools, one of the Division I schools in our country that is D1 Ivy League, right? And Northwestern is one of them. Stanford is the other. I'm sure there's a few others that would be up there battling for that right to say that. But I mean, Northwestern, I mean, you got to say that it's one of the top academic programs in the country, and that makes it in the world as well. And Pat Fitzgerald used to say one of those things all the time to all the guys he was recruiting. This isn't a 4-year commitment. This is a 40-year commitment because of how strong the Northwestern alumni and networking is. And you see it all over in the sports world and the business world. I feel like I see Northwestern, Boston College guys all over the Northeast right now. So,
Yes.
that network is strong and it is real. So these young men have some tough decisions to make. At the end of the day, though, you are having a free ride at one of the greatest schools this country has ever seen. So, now you're kind of putting your faith back into the people who are running the school and hoping that they can find someone that is at least going to keep some sustainability in the proper direction. The crazy thing too, though, and we got to remind everybody, these past 2 years, it's not like Pat Fitzgerald has really been killing it.
Right.
I mean, the past 2 years, I think his total overall record is like 4-20 something. So, he hasn't really been crushing it in this modern era of football, especially with the transfer portal being more aggressive. So it'll be very curious to see what steps Northwestern takes to move forward with their program.
Taking this in a little bit more of a fun perspective and moving past all the negatives of it, there is now a coaching opening, and one of our favorite just games in the media is to talk about like who takes this job, who makes the most sense. Now it's going to be hard for them to find somebody who fits exactly the needs of this situation. It feels as though that they would want an established coach with a background of working at multiple programs, or at least being a head coach at one program, that they're able to handle and navigate the chaos that might ensue once they do take over. Now, it was floated out there, the whole Ed Orgeron thing, and that was very quickly debunked by Bruce Feldman, who is very clearly close with Ed Orgeron, who wrote a whole book about him and followed him in his whole time at Ole Miss. So Bruce Feldman is trusted there. I also want to throw out there, I jokingly talked about it on one of my shows, and for some reason I posted the clip. Ed Orgeron's son quote tweeted and said, "Not happening." So we've got a little bit of a direct source on that. But so no Ed Orgeron, but I would love to pitch some options here on who we think could take over. Ryan, you and I are in agreement on this one guy. So who's the one who you think would make sense?
I think David Shaw makes a lot of sense. So obviously the former coach of Stanford, because I think that there's a lot of parallels that you made. I mean, literally Matt just talked about Stanford and Northwestern being the hierarchy as far as when you're talking about education, right? Like you could throw Notre Dame and Vanderbilt into that conversation as well, but those are two of the premier academic institutions of the country. So David Shaw, although the last couple of years was not great at Stanford, he still understands all the difficulties and the trials and the tribulations that it comes with getting a football team up to caliber in a Power 5 conference with the academic restrictions that you have. He understands that. Recruiting, when academics matter and you have to be able to get a kid in school and all those restrictions that come into place. So I think you look at that and say that that's a pretty easy direct parallel. He also has won a lot of football games in his career. Again, the last couple have not been great. But I would also say this, guys, and this is just my opinion, just kind of as an observer, Stanford is one of those programs that I don't think necessarily cares a ton about being this high-level program, right? Like they don't put a lot of money into football. They are an academic institution first and foremost. Matt, you already talked about some of the numbers. Northwestern has shown that they do care a little bit more about athletics, right? Like they're going to put some money back into the football program. They're potentially going to reinvest that money to make the program and the athletic part of it and the everything involved better quality. So I think if David Shaw is in a better situation where everybody, the boosters, the alumni, everyone top, presidents, all on the same page of we want to get this to a respectable and consistent program, not we'll win 10 games one year and then go 1-11 and 3-9 the next couple years, right? Like consistency. I think David Shaw can still be that guy because I think David Shaw is a good football coach. I do. I just think that he needs support behind him, which I don't think he had, especially during the last few years of his Stanford career. So I think that you bring in a veteran guy, a guy that knows the landscape, a guy that knows how to get around all those difficult areas of trying to support a football team at a high level with the academic restrictions that are there. I think David Shaw would actually be a very seamless transition, potentially going from Fitzgerald to Shaw.
Matt, you warned us that you have a unique pick. Who do you think it could be?
Oh, it wasn't like one of those. I mean, don't give me that, Joe. But
you said you were excited to tell us. Sorry,
I was very excited to tell you guys. I love Shaw. I really do. I think that's a fantastic pick, for this going forward, and for them to keep him in consideration because of the person that he is, the character, and all that. So that's a great one. I look at Gary Patterson, former TCU head coach, as being someone to maybe look into as a potential head coach for Northwestern. I mean, this is a guy that accumulated 181 wins and 79 losses in his career as a head coach. He's been very successful at TCU, another school that has some of its limitations because of the type of school that it is. Not every recruit in the world is exactly excited to go to Texas Christian University. So he knows how to sell the school himself, his organization, and he knows how to, essentially be a great leader of young men. And he's been doing it for a very long time. And of course, we know that he had this past year, he was not the head coach there. He was, I think, the assistant special teams coach at Texas, if I'm correct.
Or like an analyst.
I think he was an analyst.
Yeah, so he's an analyst, right?
Analyst.
So he's been involved in the game. He's obviously been, paying attention to what's going on in the recruiting trail in those meetings with those Texas coaching staff. So I think Gary Patterson would be a really interesting nod for Northwestern to look into because of his rapport as a man and as a leader for as long as he's been doing this.
Joe, I know what your pick's going to be. It's going to be Brian Kelly because he has northern roots and he looks good in
He'll have to change his accent again.
Well, yeah, he's already got the whole Midwest accent going on, but he should have that going on as his accent. But I have two I just want to throw out there. I think Willie Fritz is a good one to bring up. He turned down the Georgia Tech job, and he's somebody who has coached successfully over the past couple of years and for a decent amount of time at Tulane, which is an academically prestigious school. I just think in general, like what you guys both talked about, you need the right type of guy who has the track record at particular types of schools. So finding somebody who is experienced with finding academically minded recruits and getting them to come play for you, I think that Willie Fritz makes sense. I also have a little bit of a strange one that I want to throw out, and I think that Ryan's going to hate this one. I think that Al Golden is a bit of a sneaky one to consider here. The Notre Dame defensive coordinator. He is a Northeast guy. He's from New Jersey. He's from South Jersey. He has coached all over the place. He has been a head coach at Temple. He's been a head coach at Miami. And there's also not the biggest love for Al Golden at Notre Dame. So I'm sure if he got that opportunity to bounce and go somewhere else, he would gladly take it. We've got about a minute remaining, but just any quick thoughts on that, Ryan, because I know that you obviously are Notre Dame.
I think Al Golden actually be an interesting one, Joe. I was not expecting you to go there. But he has experience, like you said. He also had restrictions of coaching at Temple, which is not the easiest place to get talent to come to. Right? So I think it's an interesting one. My only pushback on Willie Fritz, because I think Willie Fritz is a really good football coach. But if you just look at the history of Willie Fritz, he's a Southern guy, man. Like that's his roots. He's been in Texas. Yeah. He's been in Georgia. He's been down on the
Brian Kelly is a Midwest guy. He's at LSU.
And he should have stayed up north, but at a different institution. But all right, anyway.
KYP, know your personnel.
That's it for today's show, folks. Thank you for tuning in. At Joe DeLeone, at Sims Complete QB, at Rise and Draft. We will be back next week with more. Enjoy the rest of your week.